Elise Pickett here with the Urban Harvest, and today I have 3 tips for you in your Florida spring garden. Growing a vegetable garden in Florida offers a lot of opportunity and also some challenges. We are now leaving our easier season to grow in, which would be fall, and we are heading into spring. So today I wanted to go over 3 tips for growing vegetables in your Florida spring garden. And we are going to be talking about some things with the heat and the humidity, the sunlight, and a lot of other factors to consider as we head into our warmer and our dry season. So as we head from our cooler winter months into our hotter summer months, we have a pretty tough transition. Our spring season is our dry season here in Florida. So you need to be mindful of more frequent watering as the temperatures increase because we aren't getting those continual summer rains yet. That doesn't usually come until April, May, depending on where you are in the state. So keeping that in mind is important, but one of the other things to consider as we're planning out our spring vegetable garden is that you should be selecting for varieties of plants that thrive in heat and humidity. So as we're heading into our fall months, it's not quite as important to pick varieties that deal with that because in general, our winter months don't necessitate that. We can grow a lot of the crops that the rest of the country can grow. But in springtime, when we're trying to grow vegetable gardens, we need to be selecting for things that can deal with the extreme temperatures they're going to be facing at the end of their production, which is in most cases for most crops, that's when you're getting the highest levels of production is towards the end when they're mature. So we should be selecting for varieties that are heat and humidity tolerant and also faster maturing varieties of things that aren't so heat and humidity tolerant. These varieties of beans that I planted here are pole beans, which offer a longer harvest period than bush beans, but they're not just your standard variety Kentucky Wonder pole bean or anything like that. These are yard-long beans, and yard-long beans are known to be much, much more heat and humidity tolerant than some of your more traditional garden beans, your green beans. So I opted to plant these so that I have production longer into the summer months than I would if I would have planted something that was slightly less suited to our climate. So thinking about different varieties in that situation can really help you extend your season as far into our summer months as possible for some of the traditional vegetable garden crops that we all love to grow and harvest. If you are looking for guidance on different varieties that do thrive here in our Florida climate, I have a curated collection of seed varieties that you can find on my website. You can do online ordering, or if you're local to the greater Tampa Bay area, you can always do local pickup. But there will be a link for that down below if you're looking for a little bit of guidance on what varieties thrive in our Florida climate. Another great variety swap that you can do in your spring vegetable garden is to select for heat-tolerant tomatoes. We all love tomatoes. We all want to grow them as long as possible, but there are certain varieties that are going to do better in our spring months than our fall months. This here is an Everglades tomato. It is really, really well adapted to growing in our hot and humid Florida climate. And that's another thing to keep in mind too, is that fast maturing concept. So anything that is, especially with tomatoes, I do have a video on determinate and indeterminate tomatoes and different varieties of tomatoes that do well in here in Florida. So if you're interested in checking that out, just check the link above and that will take you to the video specifically on tomatoes. But keeping the fast maturing concept in mind, or something that is going to be ready over an extended period rather than all at once, is usually going to be a better fit for your spring vegetable garden than other varieties that will be ready all at once. Tip number 2 for your Florida spring vegetable garden is to try to plan ahead and protect some of your wimpier or less heat tolerant crops from afternoon sun. So what does this mean and how can you apply it in your garden? Here is an example, one example of a way that you can protect a more sensitive crop. Peppers in general tend to wilt very easily. They need very frequent watering and they need a little bit of afternoon shade to really thrive, especially when talking about producing into our midsummer months. So I have some taller crops, at least for now, that are kind of shading them from the afternoon heat. The peppers are planted on the east side of the bed, so they're getting access to nice morning sun, and by the time that the sun shifts to the west in the afternoon, the hottest part of the day, they get a little bit of relief from that blatant hot direct sunlight. So that just helps them to thrive a little bit better than they would if they were standalone without any shelter or protection. Some other ideas for shading out and sheltering those crops could be potentially planting some sort of pole bean or taller growing summer crop like okra is a really nice one to plant on the west side of your garden bed so that it will literally shade out the eastern side of your bed and give them some afternoon shade. You do have to make sure you pick varieties that can handle that afternoon heat, but in general the beans will do great with that. Any sort of climbing dry bean or anything like that. Lima beans, great option. Like I said, the okra potentially. Any of those taller crops that could shade out a part or all of the rest of the bed will be a huge relief in a few months' time. The other thing you can consider is potentially using either your fence, the house, or even trees to offer some shade on the entire bed. Now, in our winter months, we really need to shoot for 4 bare minimum hours of sun, up to 6, depending on the crop, sometimes even 8 hours in fall and winter. In summer, in our spring vegetable garden, that's going to be a lot of sun for certain crops. A lot of your leafy greens and that kind of thing aren't going to want that much sun. So if you can figure out a location in your yard and in your space where you will have a little bit of shelter and less sun, your plants could potentially thrive. The beds that are directly next to my house, I'm going to be planting with my heat-tolerant lettuce varieties, some of the peas, and other sensitive crops. I also use the shade of the magnolia tree above me and plant on the eastern side of my garden the crops that are a little bit more sensitive as well. So those are 3 different ways that you can kind of play with light in the garden to help extend your season as much as possible. The third tip for growing vegetables in your Florida spring garden is to be very vigilant about pest pressure. It's very easy. I work a lot with beginner gardeners, but also more advanced. If you haven't been through a few seasons, it's easy to get comfortable and complacent with pest management over our fall and winter months. But when the temperatures start warming up, the pests start to come out in force. So it's really important to stay on top of things so that you don't have these like boom and bust and these out of control infestations before you have the time to catch it. So spending some frequent, short duration, but on a more frequent basis, time in your garden, just looking around and noticing bite marks in the leaves, curled leaves. I do have several videos on pest management, so I will put a link to that entire playlist above. But being really vigilant, especially this time of year when the whiteflies and the aphids and the caterpillars really start coming out, will go a really long way to success in your spring garden. So for example, here I have a green stalk I've been growing in, but I noticed the other day, now this was 2 days ago, but I had a few holes in the leaves. I flipped the leaf over, found the caterpillar, gave it to my chickens, and I haven't had problems since. But had I let it go longer, I would have had more damage on the leaves. Or if it's something like aphids or something that's really reproducing quickly, it could turn into an infestation rather than a minor annoyance very quickly. So that consistent monitoring really, really goes a long way. I hope you found these 3 tips for growing vegetables in your Florida spring garden to be helpful. Definitely something that I learned through years of trial and error, and have learned to be much more diligent about coming into our spring season here. I do also have a Florida vegetable seed club, which can kind of help you navigate the change in seasons, some of the different varieties that thrive in each month. I send out 3 varieties of in-season seed that are curated, of course, for growing here in Florida. And that gets delivered to your door once a month. So if you're interested in learning more about the Florida Vegetable Seed Club, I'll have a link down below. And if you liked this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. We do weekly videos on different tips for the seasons, pest management, varieties that thrive here in our Florida climate, different permaculture concepts, all different sorts of information for your Florida vegetable garden. Have a beautiful spring day and enjoy the garden.